I found out my daughter didn't want me in her life anymore, not with a fight, not with a letter, but with a simple piece of metal. I had just returned from a week away, a little trip to the coast with my sister, Margaret. The sea air had been good for me. I felt lighter. I'd even bought a silly seashell necklace for my granddaughter, Sophie. My key slid into the lock of my daughter's front door the way it had 100 times before. I was there to water her plants and feed the cat, like I always did when they traveled. But the key wouldn't turn. I jiggled it, I pulled it out, looked at it, sure I'd picked up the wrong one for my ring, but no, it was the right key, the one she'd given me 3 years ago, just in case, and which had quickly become my weekly pass to drop off soup, to help with Sophie, to feel needed. I pushed against the door, a silly, hopeful gesture. It was solid, unmoved. And that's when I saw it. Around the keyhole, the metal was bright, shiny, and unscratched. It was new, a brand new lock. My hand, still holding my key, dropped to my side. The bag with Sophie's seashell necklace slipped from my other hand and landed with a soft thud on the welcome mat, a mat I'd bought them as a housewarming gift. I stood there on the porch of the house I'd helped them buy, staring at this new, bright lock. No phone call, no text saying, "Mom, we've had a security scare, we changed the locks." No spare key hidden under the frog statue like we'd always done. Just this, a silent, physical barrier, a message made of brass and steel. My daughter, my only child, had changed the locks, and she had done it while I was safely out of town, so she wouldn't have to see my face when I discovered it. In that moment, on that sunny Tuesday afternoon, I didn't feel anger. I felt cold, a deep, spreading cold that started in my stomach and moved out to my fingertips. It was the chill of being deliberately, carefully locked out. My daughter's name is Amanda. For most of my life, she was my universe. Her father, my husband Peter, passed away when she was just 8 years old, a sudden heart attack that left our world colorless and quiet. After the fog of grief lifted, it was just the two of us, Amy and Amanda, a team. I poured everything into her, not to spoil her, but to build a fortress of love around her, to make up for the father-shaped hole in our lives. We had our rituals: pancakes every Saturday morning, library trips every Thursday. I worked as a receptionist at a dentist's office, not for the money, but because the hours let me be home when her school bus dropped her off. She was my shadow, my confidant, my purpose. When she was a teenager, we'd stay up late talking on my bed. She'd tell me about her friends, her crushes, her dreams. I'd tell her stories about her dad. We were more than mother and daughter. We were survivors of the same shipwreck, clinging to each other on a life raft. I never remarried. Men asked, but my heart was full, half with memory of Peter, half with the living, breathing reality of Amanda. She was enough. She was everything. I cheered at every school play, every soccer game. I stayed up helping with science projects. When she got into a good college, I wept with pride and a terror of the coming silence. The house felt like a tomb that first semester. But she called every Sunday, without fail. Our bond felt unbreakable, forged in shared loss and shared triumph. Then she met Mark. He was a few years older, an architect. He was serious, thoughtful, with a calm demeanor that seemed to ground her. I was so relieved. I wanted someone stable for her, someone strong. I welcomed him with open arms. I made his favorite meals. I listened to him talk about design. I thought, this is it. My girl is safe. She's loved. When they got engaged, I gave them a down payment for their house. It was almost all of my savings, the money Peter's life insurance had left, the money I'd scrimped for decades. I didn't hesitate. A mother's gift, I'd said, pressing the check into her hand, to start your foundation. She cried and hugged me. Mark shook my hand firmly, his eyes sincere. We'll never forget this, Amy. The house was a beautiful old craftsman-style home. It needed work, and I was there every weekend, painting walls, pulling up old carpet, sanding floors. My hands ached, my back protested, but my heart sang. I was building a future with them. I was etching my love into the very walls of their home. When Sophie was born, my joy was complete. I retired early to help. I was there 3-4 days a week. I was the backup, the reliable one. Don't know what we'd do without you, Mom, Amanda would say, handing me a sleepy Sophie. I felt essential. I felt woven into the fabric of their daily lives. The key she gave me wasn't just a key. It was a symbol. It said, you are family. This is your home too. You belong here. I wore it on my key ring like a medal of honor. It was my proof that after all the years of it being just us two, our family had expanded, but I was still firmly, lovingly at its center. I believed that. I believed it with my whole heart. The first sign was so small I almost missed it. It was about the furniture. I'd found a beautiful solid oak dresser at a flea market. It needed refinishing, but I saw its potential. I spent a month working on it in my garage, sanding, staining, polishing the hardware. It was a labor of love for Sophie's room. When I finally presented it, beaming with pride, Amanda's smile didn't reach her eyes. Oh, Mom, it's huge. It's solid. It'll last her a lifetime, I said. It's just not really the style we're going for in there, Mark said gently, putting a hand on her shoulder. We were thinking of something more modern, minimalist. The words minimalist and modern started appearing more often. My crocheted blanket was a bit busy. My collection of framed family photos on their hallway table was clutter. My suggestions were met with a polite, "We have a vision for the space, Mom." I began to feel like a piece of mismatched furniture myself. A comfortable, old-fashioned armchair in a showroom of sleek, new designs. Then came the scheduling. My spontaneous drop-ins, which always involved a pot of soup or a fresh-baked loaf, started to be met with a slight panic. "Mom, you should have called. We're just about to head out to a thing." Or, "Sophie's in a really structured playtime routine now. Unplanned visits can disrupt it." So I started to call. And then I was asked to text first. And then I found myself, more often than not, waiting for an invitation that sometimes took weeks to come. The language changed. It was no longer, "Mom's coming over." It was, "Your grandmother is visiting." I went from being an integral part of the household to a guest with a key, but a guest nonetheless. One afternoon, I was in their kitchen loading the dishwasher my way. Amanda came in and watched me for a moment. You know, the spoons go in the other rack, Mom, she said, her voice tight. Oh, does it matter? They get clean either way, I laughed, trying to make it light. It matters to me, she said, not laughing. She quietly took the spoons from my hand and rearranged them. This is just how we like it. How we like it. The new mantra. My ways, the ways I'd raised her with, were now wrong, inefficient, outdated. The hardest part was with Sophie. I'd let her have a cookie before dinner. We're trying to limit sugar, Mom. I'd pick her up when she cried. We're encouraging self-soothing, Mom. I felt my every instinct as a mother and grandmother being corrected, quietly but firmly. My love, which had always felt like a warm blanket, was now being treated like an allergen they were trying to isolate. I tried to talk to Amanda, just us, over coffee at my place. I feel like I'm always stepping on toes lately, I ventured. She sighed, a long, weary sound that made me feel like a burden. It's not that, Mom. It's just Mark and I are trying to establish our own family culture, our own way of doing things. You had your way with me. This is ours. But I'm part of your family, I said, my voice small. Of course you are, she said, patting my hand, but her eyes were somewhere else. It's just a different phase. A different phase. One where I was phased out. The vacation with my sister Margaret was her idea. You need a break, Amy. You're always over there, working, helping, live a little. I think Margaret saw what I refused to, that I was clinging to a role that was shrinking by the day. I agreed, partly to prove to them and to myself that I had a life outside of their home, that I wasn't needy. Before I left, I stopped by to water the plants and get instructions for the cat. Amanda seemed distracted, busy packing for their little trip to a cabin. Don't worry about anything, Mom. We've got it covered. You just enjoy yourself. Are you sure the fern in the living room needs? We'll handle it, Mark said, smiling, already ushering me gently toward the door. Really, go, relax. Their insistence felt odd, but I chalked it up to them wanting to be independent. I hugged Sophie extra tight. Bring me a shell, Nana, she chirped. I will, my sweet girl. I hugged Amanda. Love you, honey. Love you too, Mom. Have fun. There was no hint, no warning, just a normal goodbye. The last normal moment before everything changed. So there I stood, bag at my feet, key useless in my hand. The cold feeling was being replaced by a hot, humiliated flush. Had there been a break-in? Was everyone okay? I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I called Amanda. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Hi, Mom. You back? Her voice was cheerful, normal. Amanda, I'm at your house. My key? It doesn't work. A pause. Just a beat too long. Oh, right. The locks. Yeah, we had to change them. There was a issue with the old set. They were sticking. My mind raced. The old lock was fine. I'd used it just last week. An issue? What kind of issue? Is everything all right? Was someone trying to... It's nothing like that, she interrupted, her voice smooth, final. It's just a preventative thing. Mark's idea. You know how he is about security. But you didn't tell me? I was supposed to water the plants, feed Mittens. Another pause. I could hear Sophie laughing in the background. They were home. They weren't at a cabin. We came back early, she said, as if I was reading her thoughts. And don't worry about it. We took care of it all. Really, Mom, it's all handled. Well, I said, my voice trembling despite my best effort. Can you come let me in? I have a shell for Sophie. Oh, now's not really a good time. Sophie's in the middle of something, and we're all a bit under the weather. Maybe later this week. I looked at the door. I could hear faint music playing inside. They weren't sick. They were home, and they didn't want to open the door. Amanda, I said, the name catching in my throat. Do you have a new key for me? The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It screamed through the phone line. Mom, she said, her voice dropping all pretense of cheer. It was flat, final. We think it's better if we just keep the keys to ourselves for now. It's a new rule for our family's privacy. For our family's privacy. I was no longer considered part of that privacy. I was the outsider, the one to be protected from. I see, I whispered. I'll call you later, okay? We'll set up a visit for Sophie soon. We hung up. I stared at the phone. Then I looked at the new lock, the bright, shiny, brutal lock. It wasn't about security. It wasn't about sticking tumblers. It was a line drawn in metal, a boundary erected without a conversation, without a reason I could understand. She hadn't just changed the locks on her house, she had changed the locks on her heart, and I was left standing outside in the cold, holding the obsolete key to a life that was no longer mine to enter. I picked up my bag. The seashell inside clinked softly. I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't cry. I just felt a profound, empty stillness. The foundation I had helped pour, the walls I had helped paint, the family I had helped build, I was no longer welcome inside any of it. The days that followed were a blur of quiet agony. Margaret came over. I showed her the key. I told her about the phone call. She didn't offer platitudes. She just held me while I finally, shudderingly cried. What did I do? I kept asking. What did I do that was so terrible? Maybe it's not about what you did, Margaret says softly, her own eyes wet. Maybe it's about what you represent. I didn't understand that then. All I understood was the absence, the silence of my phone, the emptiness of my days, which had once been structured around their needs. I was a clock that had lost its mainspring. I didn't call Amanda. The ball, I felt, was in her court. She made this decision. She had to own it. A week passed, then two. The only contact was a text. Hope you're doing well. Sophie says hi. A message so generic it could have been sent to a distant cousin. I was invited over for a visit a month later. It was a formal, stiff affair. In their pristine living room, I felt like a museum exhibit. Look, Sophie, it's Nana. I gave her the seashell. She loved it. But the visit was supervised, timed. I was no longer allowed to wander into the kitchen for a glass of water. "I'll get it for you, Mom," Amanda said, jumping up. I was a client in a waiting room. The key was never mentioned. The lock was never mentioned. It was the giant, gleaming elephant in the room. We talked about the weather. We talked about television shows. We did not talk about why I had to ring the doorbell at the house I'd poured my savings and my sweat into. I started therapy. A kind, older woman named Dr. Evans. I told her about the lock. I told her about the years leading up to it. I talked about Peter, about my life orbiting Amanda. "You built a world with her at the center," Dr. Evans said. "And then you placed yourself at the center of her new world, with Mark and Sophie. There was no space for you. You weren't just in the room, Amy. You were in the blueprints, and they needed to redraw them." "So I'm obsolete?" I asked, the word tasting like ash. "No," she said gently, "but your role had to change. And instead of negotiating that change with you, your daughter made a unilateral decision, a cruel one. The lock wasn't just a boundary, it was an eradication. Understanding didn't take the pain away, but it began to give it a shape, a name. It wasn't that I was unlovable. It was that our way of loving had become suffocating for her. My constant presence, my helpfulness, my investment, it had all become a weight, a reminder that she was still my little girl on the life raft, not the captain of her own ship. I began the agonizing work of disentangling my identity from hers. I took a pottery class. I joined a book club. I had dinner with Margaret and other friends. I traveled again, just a weekend here and there. I slowly, painfully began to build a life that was about Amy, not about Amanda's mother. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Letting go of the hope that the old door would reopen, accepting that the new lock was permanent. Months later, Amanda came to my house alone. She looked tired. We sat in my living room, the same room where we'd had so many talks when she was young. "Mom," she started, her hands twisting in her lap, "I need to apologize for the lock. It was a cowardly way to handle things." My heart hammered. I just waited. "I felt smothered," she said, the word bursting out of her. "Everywhere I turned, it was your taste, your help, your opinion. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't be a wife or a mother my own way. I felt like I was still just your daughter playing house. Mark felt it too. We needed to be just us. And I didn't know how to tell you that without breaking your heart. So I changed the lux instead. I thought if I made it physical, you'd get the message. I listened. The truth was both a relief and a new wound. It was real. It was a reason, a terrible, hurtful reason, but a reason. You broke my heart anyway," I said, my voice steady. "A conversation would have hurt less than a lock." "I know," she whispered, crying now. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I was wrong. So wrong." We cried together for the old way that was gone, for the pain we'd caused each other. There was no magical reconciliation, no handing over of a new key. The lock had done its job. It had forced a space between us, a painful, necessary space. That was 2 years ago. The lock on their front door is still changed. I still ring the doorbell. But something else has changed too. Me. I am no longer the woman who lives for the beep of her daughter's text. I have a life. It is quieter, smaller than the one I dreamed of, but it is authentically mine. I have friends who want me, not my ability to babysit. I have a shelf of lopsided pots I made myself. I have peace most days. My relationship with Amanda is careful. It's being rebuilt on new terms. We see each other once a month, sometimes with Sophie, sometimes just for coffee. We are polite, kind. We are learning each other again as two adult women, not as mother and dependent child. The deep, old intimacy is gone, and that grief will always be with me. But in its place is a fragile respect, a recognition of separate lives. I never got another key, and I don't want one. That need, that desperate desire to have unlimited access to her world has left me. I had to learn the hardest lesson of all, that loving someone sometimes means accepting you no longer have a place in their daily story. You become a beloved character from an earlier volume, remembered fondly, visited occasionally, but not written into every new chapter. The other day, Sophie, now 7, was at my house. We were baking cookies, making a glorious mess. She looked up at me, her face smeared with flour. "Nana," she said, "I wish you lived with us." My breath caught. I wiped her cheek with my thumb. "I live right here, sweetheart, and you can always visit me in my castle." She liked that. "A flower castle," she giggled. Later, I walked them to the door. Amanda helped Sophie with her coat. She turned to me, and for a fleeting second, I saw my little girl in her eyes. "Thanks, Mom," she said, and it didn't sound like a courtesy. It sounded real. "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. I closed the door after them. I listened to their car pull away. I looked around my flour-dusted kitchen, my cozy, quiet castle. I felt a pang, yes, the ghost of the old ache, but I also felt something solid beneath my feet, a foundation I was building for myself, one slow, deliberate day at a time. My daughter changed the locks to keep me out, and in doing so, she unknowingly forced me to unlock a door I never knew was inside myself, the door to my own life. It's a quieter life, a life with its own kind of loneliness, but it is mine, and for now, that is enough.